Whoa, what a very original and exciting video premise. I'm sure no one has ever decided to make anything even slightly retaining to this topic. Okay, you've seen the title. All 22 currently released Pixar movies as of August 2020, everything from Toy Story to Onward ranked from worst to best. This video is already going to take forever to edit, so I'll spare you the generic YouTube intro and just jump right in. This movie is garbage. It does not deserve to have ever existed in this beautiful universe, and I declare war on its existence. I've already explained my opinion on this movie, so if you haven't already, just watch my Cars 2 review. I want to emphasize that the gap of quality between Cars 2 and Cars 3 is substantially large. Like, on the garbage-o-meter, Cars 2 is on the flaming bits of debris category, while Cars 3 barely hits mild. This film is above Cars 2 in every possible aspect. Yet it's still bad. The first hour and a half of the movie plays out exactly as you'd expect, until the last 20 minutes where it all just kind of falls apart. The main thing that tears this movie apart is its lack of lesson. McQueen never faces the revelation of, oh, maybe I'm a little too old for this and should give new rookies a shot, because he decides to continue racing. I honestly can't think of a more logical reason for this to happen than Pixar wanting to keep the possibility of a Cars 4 open. But hey, at least this movie about cars was about racing. Yeah. In my Cars 2 review, I bashed on Brave for being forgettable and boring, but after rewatching it, I can confirm that Brave is forgettable and boring. I literally wrote in my notes as I was watching this movie, nobody cares about Mordu, so that kind of illustrates how bored I was with this film's constant exposition. There definitely was something interesting going on in the first act, sort of like Aladdin meets Mulan, but then the movie took a detour into Brother Bear and couldn't find its way out. The plot revolves on bringing Merida and her mother together to open each other's minds and understand their differing viewpoints. But the movie only allows for Merida's mother to have this realization. Merida, on the other hand, is still the same rebellious teenager who don't want to marry no man that she was in the beginning.
Marriage is terrible!
Also, just to emphasize how dumb the lore was in this movie, according to its rules, it literally could have ended about 20 minutes earlier because of the vague reversal statement the witch gave.
Fate be changed, mend the bond torn by pride.
Okay, so that metaphorically half happened here, but nope, she's still a bear because we gotta have that sunrise bear fight climax. From here on out, I believe that every movie is at least good, which is quite impressive. I mean, out of all the films this company has made, they've only made 2 that I dislike and 1 that I want to be erased from existence in the collective memories of all human beings. That being said, yes, I like The Good Dinosaur. I think it's an alright movie. Sure, at its worst, it's uninspired and a blatant ripoff of The Lion King, but at its best, it's actually a movie with a character that learns something. Arlo starts off terrified of everything, but after facing many obstacles and monsters in his path, he does the unimaginable and becomes a truly honorable descendant of his father. It's an alright movie, even if most of it was really slow and boring. Out of all of Pixar's non-Cars sequels, this is the one that is most obviously not as great as its original. Unlike every other Pixar sequel coming up on this list, this movie doesn't accomplish much of anything. I like how they insinuated that Dory will never forget anything anymore after this movie, but I think with a little more pushing, they could have made that revelation a lot more hard-hitting. But I won't lie, this movie's fun to watch and beautifully animated. It just doesn't even come close to being close to how incredibly marvelous Finding Nemo is. This is probably the weirdest one to throw in because it's a post-2011 Pixar film that isn't remembered very well. I mean, most of my personal memories of this movie take the form of A Bug's Land at Disneyland, which doesn't even exist anymore. But after giving this movie another shot after all these years, it's actually half decent. Since it's literally their second movie, it doesn't fall into the Pixar formula trap, which is quite refreshing to be honest. The main characters, however, are a little cliche and there's a lot of cringy simp moments between Princess Ada and Flick. But one thing that really surprised me about this film was its comedy. It had a really strange flow to some scenes, which gave it a possibly unintentional comedic flair.
You always cast me as the broom, the pole, the stick. You're a walking stick!
It's funny! However, the problem is, when put against other Pixar films, it falls on its face simply because the other ones are just better. But all in all, A Bug's Land is a really cool theme park attraction. I mean, A Bug's Life is decent. So after all the talk I've done with the Cars sequels, you'd probably think that I don't like this one. But if you think that,
You must be out of your
gosh darn
mind!
We're at the point where every movie is at least a 7 out of 10, which again is pretty impressive considering how early on in the list we still are. Cars 1 is a good movie because the universe it sets is not meant to be some big elaborate creative goldmine. It's simply a template for this very simple yet heartwarming story about a self-centered race car becoming not self-centered. Yeah, of course, this is nowhere near top tier Pixar, and I can totally see why this film wasn't liked at the time, but maybe it's just the childhood nostalgia in me talking, but this film is pretty great. Incredibles 2 is a very enjoyable, funny, and exciting movie. Yeah, of course the first Incredibles is miles ahead, but this movie has so many elements that I honestly think did better than the original to truly justify its existence, unlike Finding Dory. It had great comedy, stellar action, and a family dynamic that was way more fleshed out here. And while yeah, I could probably complain about the screenslaver or go into conversation of if this plot was the right way to go after the first one, but I'm sure everyone's heard those arguments already, so I'll spare you that and just leave you with Jack beating up this raccoon because holy frick, this is so terrifying and cool. This movie surprised me. A prequel of Monsters Inc. in which the premise is monsters going to college should not have worked at all, but it did. I mean, how can you really argue with a movie that's message is, hey kids, sometimes you're gonna fail, and there's nothing you can do about it. It's probably one of Pixar's most powerful and real messages. But the ending aside, I still think the premise of these monsters going to a university is kinda weird. Like, I get that's logically what would happen before they get a job at a scaring facility, but it's definitely not the most flattering area of this universe to focus a story on. But at the end of the day, it works, and it works well. Again, I want to stress that we're far enough into this list that I really like these movies. That being said, Toy Story 1 is the worst of the Toy Stories. Its premise is very creative and original, but the sequels were just able to outdo it by focusing on more interesting and gut-punching areas of this sentient toy universe. I love how short and to the point this movie is. I mean, it's barely 80 minutes long and every second is crucial to its plot. It's super creative and genius, and yeah, that's kind of all I have to say that hasn't been said a million times. Wow, I was not expecting this. Pixar did something quite phenomenal in 2019. They made another freaking Toy Story and people really liked it. That alone is quite impressive. It was so easy to look at the first trailer for this movie before it came out and be like, well, that looks like trash. But the way this movie was crafted, there is just no room for much trash. Well, other than Buzz Lightyear, he was pretty garbage in this movie. The ending of this movie challenges just about every moral and rule set up in this universe. A toy's purpose in this life is to bring joy to a child. Yeah, that's not really how this movie ended. If you were to just tell someone how this movie ended, they would probably think it's a terrible movie. But it is so far from that because throughout the entire film, it faithfully sways you away from these rules in a believable and in-universe way. I could honestly go on and on about how much of a shock this movie is, but to sum up all my thoughts, despite popular belief before this movie came out, it isn't trash. So I guess this can officially be considered an underrated Pixar movie since it did trash in the box office because of that one really annoying thing going on right now. Onward is an epic, exciting adventure with a very emotional payoff. The way this film is structured keeps it very well-rounded and secure to make the ending as hard-hitting as it is. And while yeah, this movie is quite shockingly unfunny, especially considering the two main characters are Chris Pratt and Tom Holland, like what's how? The entire movie is worth it just for that gut punch of an end. It's a perfect representation of something Pixar does best. They're happy, sad endings. Spoiler warning since this movie's still sorta new. For the entire movie, Ian wants nothing more than to meet his father since he wasn't ever alive to have met him. And by the end of the movie, he still hasn't met his father. But that doesn't matter anymore because throughout this cleverly structured journey, he's learned that his brother acted as a father figure throughout his life. The character never got what he initially wanted, but instead learned that he can be content without it. It's something that Cars, Toy Story 3, Up, Monsters University, and kind of Inside Out did just as well. And if this movie's supposed to be a template for the Pixar formula, it is one great template. Hey, it's that super sad movie about emotions having emotions. Okay, Pixar's starting to get pretty meta. I don't really have much to say about this movie other than I really hope there's a sequel because I think there's a lot of creative aspects in this concept that they could explore. Hint hint, the addition of more than 5 emotions. But at the end of the day, this film gets the message of it's okay to be sad across pretty clearly. My biggest criticism with the plot is when Anger picks up the light bulb and is like, everything was better when we were in Minnesota. It's the move that caused Riley to not be happy, not the fact that that Joy is literally missing from headquarters, so by definition there is no possible way for Riley to be happy. I don't really get why none of them realized this before, but Riley was happy before Joy left in San Francisco. It just seemed like they needed some sort of explanation to have Riley go full emo mode, but other than that one piece of criticism, yeah, this movie's pretty emotional, bro. For a while, I used to think that this was the best Toy Story, and while it's super emotional, intriguing, and fun, yeah, Toy Story 2 is slightly better. This movie is quite clearly writing off the themes of Toy Story 2, but making it a little more personal to the audience because we care about Andy, unlike that one girl who abandoned Jessie. And we don't want to see him grow up, but eventually we accept it since growing up is inevitable, and it leads us to a beautiful conclusion. But all that aside, Lotso is actually pretty terrifying. I remember seeing this movie in theaters when I was like 7, and when all the toys were yelling at him to stop the conveyor belt and he was just like, "Where's your kid now, Sheriff?" and left them to burn. Yeah, that kind of freaked me out a lot. He's not Pixar's best villain, but he's probably one of the scariest. Toy Story 2 proves that making a sequel doesn't always mean it has to be bad. I mean, this movie was originally going to be direct to video, but then Lasseter was like, wait, this actually isn't garbage, let's try to push this to theaters. But it still wasn't good enough for him, so he redid most of the scripts 9 months prior to the deadline, forcing animators to work heavy overtime to finish this film in time for the end of the century. And they somehow made a perfect sequel. That doesn't mean the movie is perfect, but it certainly exceeds the first in every aspect. I genuinely wonder what the look on John Lasseter's face was when he realized that he can make a sequel to Toy Story about toy abandonment and growing up, because it's just the perfect concept for this world. And the dilemma Woody faces between being team go to Japan or team stay with Andy is perfect, because even the audience can make an opinion separate from what the popular choice is. Also, the comedy is stellar in this movie.
How do you spell FBI?
Not the funniest Pixar movie, but the second funniest Pixar movie. Coco is a movie that sets up a culturally accurate concept with all intentions of tearing your emotions to shreds by the end, and it succeeds pretty well. First, they got introduced to the land of the dead and explain how and why people face a final death. Once that's understood and Hector is revealed to be Miguel's great-great-grandfather, the audience knows exactly what needs to happen next. The one person still living with his memories needs to remember him. And what better way to get someone to remember something than music? If you don't feel anything during this scene, you don't have a soul. What baffles me the most about this movie is that it wasn't some elaborate concept invented to tell this story. It's very accurately based on El Dia de los Muertos. And don't just take it from this white boy who's only learned about this holiday from Spanish class, take it from the many Latino artists and fans who approve of this movie's depiction. This right here shows the power of doing intensive research to make something as accurate as possible, and I encourage everyone working on a project involved with a culture that isn't your own to do the research, because it will pay off. In my mind, Monsters, Inc. will probably always be the funniest Pixar movie. Mike Wazowski's entire figure is manufactured to be a meme. There's so many jokes that happen so nonchalantly throughout this film that I guess we all just kind of forgot when we were kids.
I said, if you talk to me like that again, we're through. Oh, what'd you say? You know my mom. She sent me to my room.
This quality and type of comedy is thrown all over this film purely for it to exist. It's golden. And I haven't even mentioned Roz yet.
Good morning, Roz, my succulent little garden snail. What's that?
Another amazing thing this film does is create a whole world over a childhood fear. I mean, why is it that so many kids claim there are monsters in their closet? It can't be because monsters have a secret world that's powered by human emotion and they must harvest it every night to keep up with the daily quota. Can it? That explanation sounds so bizarre and complex, but this film masterfully writes it in a way that's so simple to understand. Sure, the exposition at the beginning can feel a little forced, but when it passes, this entire world lights up for the audience to understand. And it just makes sense. Okay, I've heard the criticism for this movie. Oh, it's a good movie for about 10 minutes and then it's 101 Dalmatians meets The Jungle Book. But no, this movie is worth all of its minutes because the whole point of it is to bring Carl the one thing he never thought he gave Ellie, an adventure. But by the end, he realizes that carrying the grief of his wife is weighing him down from having another adventure. Carl already had an adventure with Ellie. It was their life. And Ellie is giving Carl the opportunity to not obsess over her death and move on to a new life. It's pretty heartfelt when you think about it. But of course, yes, Nonetheless, the first 10 minutes are quite amazing. In that short amount of time, the audience not only fell in love with these characters, but also cried their eyes out over the death of one of them. And honestly, I think it was kind of the point to get the audience sad for Ellie, because then it made Carl's realization not just a realization for him, but for the audience as well. So yeah, Up is more than the first 10 minutes. Stop trashing on it, haters. Whoa, this film moved me. I was not expecting to like this movie as much as I did when I rewatched it a few months ago. As a kid, I remember watching this a couple times here and there and thinking, oh, it's a funny movie about a rat who can cook, how funny and weird and cool. But when I rewatched it, I found out that this movie was not made for the kids. At its essence, Ratatouille is about changing the perspective of society to accept something that is unacceptable. What better way to portray this message than to make it about a rat who is good at cooking? I mean, how do you even go about accepting that? But you can tell that Remy loves it, and against all odds of society, he is going to cook in the kitchen because it brings him joy. So he freaking cooks in the kitchen. And surprise, surprise, he gets the Anthony Fantano of food to give him the equivalent of a 10. I know everyone's already gushed about Anton Ego's review at the end, but honestly, how can I not? I wouldn't go as far as to say that I'm a film critic. I'm just some dude on the internet trying to give my subjective opinion about things that I care about. But I relate to Anton Ego's speech 100%. Sometimes the best things in life just can't really be put into words, and the fact that Ego just downright accepts that a rat made his food and is totally fine with it is what makes this all work. Who you are is accepted based on the phenomenal things you do. Case closed. What is there not to love about WALL-E? This right here is Pixar at its height of creativity. So much thought and effort had to be put in making all these different robots their own characters with emotions. It's something that probably couldn't be pulled off the same way in live action because at that point the suspension of disbelief isn't really there. The sound design is something from a different dimension. It's not surprising to me in the slightest that Ben Burtt is the one behind it, because he's basically a master at turning abnormal sounds into something normal. But what makes this concept so great is that even though it's supposed to be some sort of potential future type movie, it never feels like it's shoving it in your face. It just feels like a genuine critique of taking things for granted. As a kid, I always thought it was weird that when they came back to Earth and it was still garbage, they just didn't care. But that's because I live in a world that isn't garbage. Well, literally that is. Of course they would be willing to rebuild from scratch on this screwed up planet. None of them have ever experienced life on a planet. It's a movie that makes you think without having to try real hard at arriving there. And no, I don't have a problem with this movie going in a different direction halfway through. I mean, where did you think this movie was gonna go? Okay, so yeah, this movie's perfect. I don't even know what to properly say. The Incredibles is just a template on how to make a squeaky fresh story. To avoid falling into the hole of making an incredible pun for this segment, I'm going to be using thesaurus.com to help me with the script. Every single character in this film goes through a complete arc that is nothing far from astounding. Bob learns that his family is more important than the glory days. Helen learns that she's not the only one who cares deeply for the well-being of her family. Violet learns to step out of the shadows and be herself. Dash learns to balance his superpowers in school life. And Jack? Yeah, he's just kind of there. You can really tell they rewrote the dialogue at least 1,000,000 times before they got it perfect. I mean, some of these lines are just truly awe-inspiring.
Tell me how that's possible with you writing checks to every Harry Hardluck and Sally sob story that gives you a phone call!
And I haven't even mentioned Syndrome yet. Syndrome is no less than one of the greatest supervillains in cinematic history. I would not hesitate to put him up with the likes of Joker and Thanos. I mean, he was such a great villain that Marvel copied him not once, but twice. Honestly, what else is there to say that hasn't already been said? This movie's just superhuman. Wait, what? That one doesn't work. What the heck, thesaurus.com? It's incredible. I don't know if I will ever be able to accurately explain why I love this movie so much. Maybe it's cause I love the ocean, or maybe it's cause I literally can't remember a time this movie wasn't in my life, but Finding Nemo just sticks with me in a way that no other film has. The score is cemented into my memory as something I associate directly to my childhood. Every single time I listen to one of the songs, I remember something new from when I was a kid that I haven't thought about in years. And I genuinely think that is because of how beautifully imaginative and perfect the entire package is. I could go on talking about the themes of micromanagement and independence in this film and how it expertly flips both characters by the end, but is that really the reason I love this movie so much? Sure, it plays a really big role in it, but at the end of the day, this movie is simply a perfect piece of art that never fails to remind me of how happy life was when I was a kid. But I'm still gonna explain it all, because I can't justify my number one being there simply because childhood. The movie starts with Marlin losing everything he has, except one egg. At that point he promises it will be his lifelong duty to protect it, and evidently he takes it a little too far. It's pretty clear that Nemo wouldn't have tried to touch the boat if it weren't for Marlin being overprotective, and that's something Marlin fights with for the entire film. How do you balance keeping someone safe while letting them be their own person? During their separation, Nemo learns to be more independent, having Gil as his ally, and Marlin learns to let go a little more with Dory as his ally. And at the end, we get to see both Marlin and Nemo taking on their newly formed traits to save thousands of fish. It all plays like poetry. So that being said, Finding Nemo is my favorite movie of all time. Hey, guess what? My opinion is actually not the only one that exists. The beautiful thing about life is that we're all different and we all have separate opinions, so feel free to leave your ranking of these movies in the comments. And if you put Cars 2 at number 1, no, I don't hate you. I just disagree strongly, but I appreciate that you're using your mind to form an opinion and not just taking my word for it. As for the future of this list, we've got Soul coming up hopefully this November, but probably not in theaters. Whenever it comes out, I'm sure I'll be enticed to make a video on it, and I'll add it to the list during my review. And also, just recently they announced that Luca, a film about two Italian brothers, is coming out next summer, so that's pretty cool. I'm all for originality, and this looks like it'll be like Coco where they get the culture spot on. I'm going to be making more videos in the future, so if you haven't already, please subscribe and share this with your friends so I can grow this tiny channel and maybe justify spending hours editing these videos. My few subscribers may have noticed that I sort of rebranded the channel. Don't worry, I'm still making the same kind of content. I just wanted to make something that looks a little more professional. And with that, I guess I gotta find a way to close the video. I don't know, I'll just throw in a meme or something.
Well, life's a bee, and then you drive.